Chapter Anniversary Dinner Aftermath. After briefly chasing the envoy, crashing onto the floor and realizing the indignity and childishness of scrambling under tables, the two goons beat a hasty retreat out of the dinner. The envoy was ushered by Falcior and his personal guard with the thin mustache downstairs. Popheme took Francis's arm, followed by Haida, who took her brother, with both Kepo and Spliff's begrudging acceptance. They returned to the main level. Spliff was barely clocking reality. He didn't know what the incident at dinner was about, and he didn't care. He didn't notice Francis trying to subtly get his attention. In his youth, Francis had gotten drunk with another young student who tried to convince him that people could feel if you stared at them. People could feel your eyes even with their back turned. Keep looking and the person will feel it and notice you. They experimented with this all night, one of them closing their eyes while the other looked at them or the wall. There did seem to be an effect, they thought drunkenly that night, though Spliff was proving the theory demonstrably false as Francis stared directly into the back of his unwashed curls, and the gnome did nothing other than walk forward. They walked through the open main floor to the garden with the rock sculptures. Falcior approached a rock and touched its side very precisely. There was a faint audible click, and Falcior pushed the rock to the side like it was made of hay. He held out his hand for the envoy to go first. Finally, Spliff's interest was piqued. Another secret. How had he forgotten? That's what he always used to get himself out of funks. Read a book, find another mystery. Or perhaps it was just the return of his anxiety overriding the depression as he thought about descending into a dungeon with people he assumed might kill him at any moment. Still, he had to see what the secret below held. He followed Kepo, Haida gently encouraging him by his side. Francis took Popheme's hand, an action he hadn't done organically since he was 16. He must have held a hand at some point in his adult life, but never because he felt like he needed a hand the way he felt like he needed one now. She indulged him for a moment, but quickly dropped his hand when Falcior's personal guard with the thin mustache turned to face them, waiting for them to descend so he could close the false door and presumably stand guard. She took his hand again briefly as they descended the short steps, squeezed the hand definitively, then let go. Francis had never previously bothered to imagine the possible extravagance of a single room. No room could ever beat a cool breeze on a warm day and the horizon of the sea or a clear night sky. This room still didn't beat the variety of the night sky, but Falcior's room came close. Little pinpricks of light twinkled on the ceiling in between chunks of purple quartzite, embedded into the ceiling which refracted and shimmered. One large light simulating the moon was the main source of illumination by the desk in the corner, which looked toward the stairs. The opposite wall had a glittering green terrarium where a large lizard with milky eyes sat on a branch. Spliff found the bar, got on his tiptoes and poured clear wine out of a big decanter and left the decanter on the floor by his feet, waiting for the show. Whatever performance needed to be put on before they could justify killing him. A great trick, really, getting him to walk down willingly. Falcior asked the envoy to explain the circumstance of what had transpired. After an explanation, which included a lot of hedging about not really knowing what it was all about, Falcior gently told the envoy he'd explained enough. Falcior looked over at Popheme. "Any ideas?" she asked. Francis detected a strain of affected naivete. "I better have a look at that letter first." Falcior motioned to the envoy to bring him the letter. Falcior walked to his desk and split the seal on the letter with a knife. He said to the envoy, "You can go. Wait with my guard and I'll tell you in a bit if I plan a response." The envoy bowed obligingly and walked up the stairs. The false rock turned very quietly. Everyone was silent while Falcior read. Finally, Francis caught Spliff's eye. He tried to signal somehow. What was a good gesture he could give to explain the situation? He couldn't think of anything, so after Spliff raised his eyebrows, Francis tilted his head at Popheme and mouthed, "She knows." Spliff shrugged and took a drink of the wine. He now felt bored. He proclaimed to everyone, "What am I doing here?" "Oh, hush," Kepo hissed. No one has the answer to that goddamn question except you." "How philosophical," Spliff joked, taking another drink of wine. Francis turned to Popheme and made an emotional bid. He couldn't imagine her doing anything other than respecting him enough to tell the truth if asked. "We need to know if we're safe." He felt uncomfortable speaking for the both of them, but did it anyway. "Spliff has told no one else about the Etheramite." Spliff gave Francis a bland look. "Or maybe I have. I should tell everybody," Spliff said. "It finally comes out. What have I been telling you?" Keppo yelled at Haida as if she was personally responsible. "He has no respect for anything." Popheme waited for the energy to dissipate. Falcior kept reading the letter. "You should know, both of you," Popheme gestured at the Druid and the drunk gnome. "We did discuss killing you, but it seemed a shameful waste of brain power, and so now you're part of the Trust, and you can't be anything else. One would have thought this was implied to beings of your intellects. Try to keep up." Popheme released one of her big, short-toothed smiles. This news made Spliff feel both better and worse. Haida said, "It's a good life we've got. We just want you to be a part of it. You don't have to be or do anything. Just be yourself." Spliff looked over at his sister, feeling the potential of gratitude. He tried to scrabble after that feeling in his mind and tipped more wine into his glass. Keppo asked Spliff, not really asking, "Good, have another. What's that going to do for you?" "What did the first one do?" Spliff responded, offhand. He wondered now if Keppo was his worst enemy. Strange how life worked. The people who had been closest to you had the most to hold over your head. He needed to finally kill his anxiety somehow. He had been running away from the giant boulder of feeling which was Ionata for most of his adult life. For once he should stand his ground. He lobbed the glass at Keppo, spilling wine over his fancy shirt as the glass shattered on the ground. "What? Did you want it? You were always a jealous little crumper," Spliff said. Francis didn't understand the word, but judging by Keppo's rage, the context clues explained enough. Keppo ran at Spliff. The fight would not be fair. Keppo buried his shoulder into Spliff's chest and knocked him against the bar, which clanged all the glass bottles. They started smacking at each other inexpertly, and to his surprise, Francis ran over and grabbed the whole of Keppo's head in two hands and chucked him away from the fight. "Disgraced," Keppo yelled in Yomish, cursing at Francis. He pulled a dagger out of a sheath in the inside of his pants, and Francis was stunned with fear. Spliff grabbed the glass decanter of wine and threw it at Keppo, but missed short. Finally, Falcior boomed, "Enough!" Keppo didn't listen. He ran with his knife aimed straight at Francis's guts. The only thing which saved him was the move was so obtuse and obvious Francis simply sidestepped and then ran away, the little gnome chasing him like a baby rhino. Finally, Popheme tripped Keppo and looked forlornly at Falcior. When Keppo tried to rise, Falcior dashed over and grabbed the back of his tunic. He threw him into the pile of pillows by the milky-eyed lizard, which was his seating area. He squatted in front of the now humiliated gnome. "And remind me, what do you do exactly which justifies this outrage?" Falcior continued squatting, waiting for a response. When none came, he turned to Haida. "Get him out of here." Haida scurried over and tried to calm Keppo. She turned to Popheme and said, "It's not like him. He had too much wine at dinner, I think." She took him by one shoulder and led him to the stairs. Spliff was sure Keppo was going to turn and make a comment, but his head never turned, and Spliff didn't know if he should take this as a good sign or a bad one. Hothead Keppo he could understand. The Keppo who quietly calculated revenge would be far more dangerous. After they left, Falcior rearranged his pillows and invited everyone to sit. "So we can all, finally, have the necessary conversation." Suddenly Francis felt very out of place. The only reason he'd come down here willingly was to warn Spliff, and that danger seemed past. Again he was thinking about himself in his place, which was not here. But perhaps most people never felt comfortable in the world. It was his practice to find peace no matter where he was. He took large but discreet breaths through his nose. "Well," Falcior began diplomatically, "let me officially say it is an honor to meet you, Master Spliff, all our secrets revealed. I must apologize for the secrecy, but I'm sure you understand we never expected your arrival. Your brother-in-law led us to believe the author of the notebooks in his possession was deceased. Your return has brought that oversight to light. Popheme chimed in. Our zeal overcame our due diligence. The big words made Spliff concerned. In his experience, that was how gnomes started to talk to you when they wanted to make sure the playing field was not level, when they wanted to still operate from a position of authority. He really only had one question. Why lie? He asked with drunken sincerity, feeling sober as a judge. Ah, well, for every good reason and perhaps a couple bad ones. But from what I understand, the Council of Gnomes wasn't going to do anything with your idea. A little mythology never hurt anybody. Falcior's speech was elegantly diplomatic, Francis thought. From a certain angle, he could see why Falcior succeeded where others had failed. It was more than the words. It was the lilt in his tone, pitching his voice like song to express aw shucks at first and then finish with authority. Tell me the reasons, Spliff demanded. Falcior thought. Hard to sum up quickly. Perhaps I could put them in a letter. Would that do? And speaking of letters, he was changing the subject purposely, but also because the king's letter was the only thing he could think about. He wants you to return. Falcior was speaking to Popheme. Popheme responded glibly. What else is new? None of your students in the capital can make it work. Make what work? Francis asked. The two magicians ignored him. Popheme looked at Spliff. Perhaps we could send the gnome. He seems like he could handle a system initiation. They were purposefully leaving them out of the loop. It was another power tactic. Falcior stood and walked over to his desk and pulled a special decorated bottle from under it. He asked Popheme to grab him 4 glasses. What was the first potion, do you think, Master Druid? Falcior asked, carrying over the bottle. Francis didn't know. A mildly amusing question, but he couldn't perceive time in such a way where there would be a first of anything. Everything existed before it was discovered. The act of discovery had nothing to do with a concept like first. If memory serves, I believe the first apothecaries cured herbs in animal fat and cubed them to be added to stews. But of course humans were drying herbs before then. The first apothecaries discovered it was the oils in the leaves you wanted to preserve. Falcior nodded and scratched away the wax on his ornate bottle. I've always thought the first potion must have been wine. That's one way of defining potion, Francis said. Popheme walked back over with the glasses. Would you like to see some magic? Falcior asked, handing the bottle to Francis. Here, uncork this for me, would you? He pointed at the bar. Francis stood and uncorked the wine, watching Falcior over his shoulder move his hands in elaborate patterns with closed eyes. He returned and sat and handed the bottle to Popheme, continuing to watch the hands. Falcior opened his eyes. Badao, and the wine is opened. He smiled and sat on his pillow. That was not merely a joke, he continued. It's a demonstration. Ask and you shall receive. No magic required. Falcior gestured at Popheme to pour the wine. What would you like, Master Spliff? What does your heart desire? This is a very good wine, by the way, made from lantern fruit. I believe on this continent they're called ground cherries, but lantern fruit sounds better, doesn't it? Spliff was in no real state to do any soul-searching, to have an answer for what he desired. I don't want to be bad. In Yomish, we have a better word for bad. Gyanut. It doesn't translate. It's kind of like he thought and accepted his glass of lantern wine. Sick in the head. We can surely all understand that, Popheme pitched in. If you understood it, we wouldn't be in this situation. There were reasons I decided to leave those stones, Spliff countered. Do you see any malevolence from us, Master Gnome? Other than a couple harmless fibs necessary to bring results, Falcior asked. I don't know if I see malevolence, but I sense. Having to think and talk, the drinks were slowing Spliff's brain. The word in common. Getting what you deserve. Comeuppance, Francis suggested. Spliff air-cheersed him with his glass and took a drink. In games, there are winners and losers. It cannot be helped. It sounds like you refuse to play. I believe I can change your mind about that, Falcior said. About what? Spliff inhaled the robust fragrance of the wine. "That you should play. Your only other option is death. I don't mean that as a threat. Everything else is a lie. My old king, for example, all he thinks about are results, but he doesn't know what he'd do if he got them. He was a born winner. One has to lose to truly appreciate the game. You don't want to lose, nobody does, but do you want to not lose so badly that you don't even consider the benefits of winning?" "Which are?" Francis ventured. He was curious. He'd heard this type of talk before, but never from one who could objectively be viewed as a winner. It was always so obvious as a scam in those other cases, but also this one, too. The only game they were playing was the one which made you play their game, the one where they always skimmed a little off the top, no matter who won or lost. "I should think they are obvious, Master Druid. Is that not the most delicious wine you've ever drank?" It was, in fact, quite delicious. "Such wines are not available to losers." Falcior sipped his wine with a smirk. Since he had been thinking about this earlier, Francis had a rebuttal. "I think the most delicious meal is the meal you have when you've been starved. Is starvation part of the game?" "Yes, certainly, everything is part of the game. What's important is your choice. Choosing to play is the only way to win, settling your mind to winning. You can choose not to play, but that makes you a loser by default," Falcior said. "So be it," Spliff chugged his wine. "This wine isn't so great." "Master Spliff," Falcior continued, slightly enthused at having to try so hard to convince. Usually these kinds of speeches worked well, quickly. "You know the secrets to this game. You will win. Do something different with your winnings. Give them all back to the people. In fact, that's a smart move. Nobody likes a winner who hoards everything for themselves. Being a winner means knowing precisely how others can also win. Perhaps, even, there is a world no longer with any losers. I can picture it. But we need gnomes like you." Francis felt verily left out. It was a normal feeling. There were precious few moments in his interactions with people where he didn't feel lonely, eventually. Perhaps Falcior could convince Spliff. Maybe, even, he was right about life being a game where one chose to play. But it had nothing to do with the wandering druid, who, if he was playing a game, it was one the man who called himself Falcior couldn't conceive. He thought back to his hallucination by the lake. Perhaps he would not wait till the end of his natural life to start exploring the oceans. Maybe his game had always been buried in the ocean. Falcior told Spliff he could easily learn how the ionic machine worked. "You are one of the few who understand the crystal intimately, other than our witch here, of course," Falcior said jokingly. As Francis turned more inward, listening to the machinations of power, he and Spliff switched internal energies. Spliff was feeling the inklings of a plan and cheering up. Having a plan also made him feel like it might be quite interesting to finally understand how the resonance worked. He could play along. His previous depression became funny. The limitations of being a self, moods fluctuating. Spliff asked for more wine and asked questions about what lie Falcior would tell the king. Falcior shook his head. "No, the king knows it comes from the rock and not lightning. I lie to him in different ways. The first rule of the game is you are playing your opponent, not the game itself." Whew. The game seems awfully complicated. Probably why I opted out in the first place. Spliff was sending back the "aw shucks" Falcior had initially presented. "Tell you what. You know what I really want?" Spliff took a hearty drink of wine and let out an appreciative smack of his lips. "I want to see some theater." Chapter Miniwuna in a Tree. Min had made it her nightly practice to sit in a tree and observe behind the Black Bear Inn. The tree had grown in the right spot and angle between buildings for her to climb up 10 feet and see who was entering and exiting the Black Bear. Though she did keep notes, her primary activity was daydreaming about starting her own theater. More often than not, she was daydreaming of an impossible theater. A theater for dreams. In her daily life, she was not very good at recreating pictures in her mind, and she wished there was a way to recreate her dreams so she could view them again and again, analyze them for meaning. She knew the meaning of her life was hanging on by a thread. Often this is true for the most passionate individuals, trying to manufacture meaning around every corner, untrusting it will come back naturally, without effort on their part. The notations of entrances and exits from the Black Bear were hard to decipher for meaning this evening, and Miniwuna was just about to climb down when she noticed a feminine gait approach the inn. Just before the entrance, the woman drew back her hood, revealing a soft complexion. This was very odd. Min took a note. Women almost never entered the Black Bear alone, especially these days and at this time of night. The cloak had a simple elegance to it as well, like someone from wealth trying to buy clothing to blend in, but the cloak had no wear and tear. She continued to climb down the tree out of curiosity. A night previous, she discovered a small hole between the timber planks in the back of the inn, and if she pressed her ear next to it, could hear conversation, to some extent. She crept up to the back, always conscious of goons who might wander behind the inn to take a piss and congratulate themselves. She pressed her ear to the small hole. It was quiet, more quiet than the usual cacophony of bar speak. She could make out the voices pretty good. The male voice said, "No, have a... Petra, fetch wine for..." Female voice, "I don't want to drink. Listen." The female voice was more clear. She must have been facing towards the back. That would make sense from Min's memory of where Calumny sat, facing the door. "This is not complicated. It was complicated, but now it's simple. 7 days. Prepare," the woman's voice said. Calumny responded, "Rules have..." "Why not tomorrow?" Laughter. "I do not make decisions based on your whims. The situation needed to be right," the female voice said with authority. Who was this woman? "Why do you trust me?" The female voice now had a sing-song quality. "If I trust... borrow..." Garbled laughter, Calumny unclear again. "You don't have to answer to me. In 7 days, you don't have to answer to anybody. But in the meantime, I need your trust," the woman's voice said. "Oh, if anything..." Miniwuna could hear the door to the tavern clang shut. She scrambled away from the back of the inn. She hid behind her tree and scribbled the conversation down in her notebook to the best of her ability. After one of the goons was finished with his long piss into a bush, Min snuck back to her hut. 7 days. Had this mystery woman been pulling the strings all along? How come she'd never seen her or heard about her before? This was a very important development. Damn, how was she supposed to sleep after that? She packed some fresh herb in her pipe. That usually helped. Maybe an idea would come to her in the form of a dream. Chapter: A Letter to Melilyn, as penned by Francis. Dear friend, yesterday was spent learning about a new thing called resonance, of which you would be excited and disturbed to know was in the hands of the powerful. I found myself in the gnome city of Ionata. I'm sure you've heard of it, but we never discussed it together, so how can I presume? I was barely aware of its existence. What a shortcoming to the mind for those who don't travel. They never get to experience the profundity of being somewhere new and yet being the same inside. I had trouble fully grasping what was being taught yesterday. I didn't deserve to be there. The knowledge was not for my ears, and yet I have a tiny bit of it now anyhow. Perhaps that is why I set about wandering, for these moments. And yet it feels, always, like the time of my life is being haphazardly spent. We never talked much about time. Too many other practical things to discuss. No, that's not true either. How many nights did we whittle away by the hearth discussing philosophies of self? But maybe all that is practical. Hell, maybe nothing's more practical than time. Sometimes I picture time as the golden raindrops of my life. Only when I am truly present do I see them fall around me. I suppose I am writing this letter because I don't know what else to do. I wonder if I will even mail it. It is a very confusing moment, and I have daydreams of a home, and your home is what I picture as I daydream this afternoon. I never felt, learning anything from you, felt words make me as woozy as I was yesterday. My mind could barely process what was being told to me, whereas everything about your teachings felt like second nature, which was being freed from a net inside myself. Literally, my legs went numb, and I felt like I might fall over on the spot. The world was not as I had perceived it. It was a scary feeling, but beautiful also. She says some fascinating things. I remember one in particular. What must be overcome, to understand this subject, but also every subject, is overcoming what you want to see. No problem in the mind is a problem of difficulty, but of will. What a beautiful and terrifying thought! What was holding me back from understanding was a self-projection. Learning such things, one feels perhaps even on the ground. The ground is not the ground. It also explains how often we Druids are reviled or turned away until we can do something practical for someone else. Only by such literal means is the gift of understanding capable to be given without the receiver needing to dive to the deepest depths of their own will. And what a gift! If all dove into their will, how many would find desire to murder? A joke? I admit, she is even smarter than you, I think. No, what am I saying? The whole point is understanding isn't the important part, it's will. She is more willful than you. Beautiful and terrifying. If I never send this letter, perhaps it will be easier to dive into my own mind and will and the details of yesterday. Such details are not for public consumption, and I know I could trust you, but if something happened to the letter in transit, I would also not be surprised if there are eyes on us watching for such correspondence. To hell, that makes me want to send the damn thing even more. If I die, I want there to be some record of why. Why do I want that? A different question for a different letter to myself. In Ionata they have light which doesn't come from oil lamps. How is something like this achieved? I am one of the first to ever know. I cannot stress enough how odd this makes me feel. I do not know what to call this woman who showed us these secrets, but for your purposes I will call her a witch. She is no such thing, really. She's like a gardener whose tool is the sun. I suppose the idea of the sun is that it's for all, and if any control... that thought is going nowhere. I will stick with witch. You will understand how iron comes from ore. There are things in this world which have weight. But what gives weight weight? Why does all rock not weigh the same? There are more properties to the rock. In one they found a special metal which finds light within itself. No, not light exactly, but as powerful as light. She calls it ergon, which means work. It's a metal which does its own work. She stood us in front of a drawing. I'm using the word us, but I have as of yet to tell you about Spliff. Another juncture where I must decide if I'm simply writing this to myself, because then I can skip it. I'm a fan of half measures in any way I can do it in a sentence. He's a gnome who took me here and now we're friends. He's a bundle of curiosity, afraid of himself. Perhaps that's why we get along. I know someone is truly suspicious when they don't even trust themselves. Every other type of suspicion can just be prejudice. I always loved our conversations about success. You're the only one I ever met who seemed to care the perfect amount. Enough for radical attention, but never so much you started needing cruelty to find perfection. What was that line from Hummerland? No human thought could do better than a leaf for understanding the essence of earth. The drawing she drew was very beautiful and terrifying, if I can repeat myself again. I recognized some of the things called gears from being on the inside of mills powered by streams, but it was many more gears. Lots more. The metal works against itself and other metals. At the center were two things which looked like seed pods which spin around each other. Apparently these need to be replaced quite frequently as the crystals inside burn up. Anyway, they spin in very tight circles, which turn slightly larger gears which spin on counterweights which have a different density of metals inside them. Gears on gears and more weights, and then a pouch of crystals and metal. On this point, Spliff had the most trouble. I was stuck on how the metal burned up, but I suppose even mountains burn. I remember that being one of the books in your library, a Druid's account of rock flowing like water. Is this adventure even better than his adventure? She tried to explain in detail about this ergon. I'm still not sure I understand. She said people misunderstand power, which seems to come flying at us with the speed of history. Although ergon is the very embodiment of speed, it is not fast. I was daydreaming, thinking about power and the ocean and all that weight which can sink a man, and yet you can hold a droplet of it in the palm of your hand. By Forsyth and Bramble, I have yet to inform you of the results of my experiment to become a beast. Ah, such a story is best told in person after a couple glasses of brandy. I miss you, my friend. I hope you shall receive this letter if I find the right carrier. Maybe I'll stay a while. But if you come and visit, you must play dumb. You have never heard of the things I've written about. Your forever pupil, Francis. Chapter: Wrangling Cats. It had been a heady couple days for Spliff. Why did it always feel like in life there were quick and monumental moments of change which seemed to happen back to back? Falcior had easily promised Spliff he could host a theater performance at the palace, and Spliff was using this as an excuse to get a day off from staring at diagrams. He was walking slowly down the incline of the mountain road, paying attention to little details in the small homes clustered on the sides of the road. The decorative trinkets were different here than in the dome. Residents in the dome tried more often to mimic decor of the outside, light greens. On the slope, trinkets were often done in dark colors, badges of honor for a life spent in the mines. Many of the gnomes on the slope who didn't mine or blacksmith worked as servants in the dome and took their children up with them, so the road was quiet in the late morning. Spliff enjoyed this, and continued to move slow, thinking. He'd got Miniwoona her show. Screw rehearsals, the players could stand and read the text in front of the council, who'd be obligated to listen. But is that what Spliff wanted, now? Where were his loyalties? To the city itself? To himself? And who was he? The first question to answer was, would he go to the capital and design the ionic resonance system for the king? And to answer that question, he needed to know if he was who he thought he was in his head, and who that was, and how such a Yome came to be. It was a big question. No Yome could blame him for needing a drink. He'd sent a message to Tycho to meet him in Jemima's hideaway tavern. He'd felt a heady rush when he first discovered a Theramite. He'd spent days, his head humming with excitement. It did feel kind of good to have that initial feeling validated. The potential he had seen, others had also picked up on. He wasn't crazy. He was trying to talk himself into being happy at what had come to pass. After all, he couldn't blame himself, and nothing bad happened the way he feared. If anything, he was responsible now for his role at the beginning, and he should take that responsibility seriously. See through a Theramite's birth into the world. Raise it properly, like a good steward. Father. Spliff slowly opened the door to the tavern, unprepared for conversation. Tycho turned and gestured at him from a corner table. He'd brought Miniwoona with him, and another gnome Spliff didn't recognize. First, Spliff had to pay his respects to Jemima, and he ordered a small glass of her special worm liquor and a round of beers mixed with hops. He sat at the table, sipped his liquor, and shivered, a pleasant warm shiver which helped reset his nerves. First things first, Tycho began. Min needs to tell you something. Miniwoona went on to explain what she had heard through the back of the Black Bear Inn and the mystery woman. Only 3 days of the 7 left. I think we should go to the mountain guard, the unidentified gnome said. He'd clearly heard about Spliff and seemed to be congenial. I'm skeptical they're going to take our word, Tycho said. But maybe from you, the other gnome pointed to Spliff. Me? Thought Spliff. Why would they listen to me? If this conspiracy was true, for all the flakes of founding ore, he was just settling into being comfortable with the situation in his head. He swore out loud in Yomish. Spliff drank the rest of his liquor. I got you a show, if that means anything now, he told Min. Miniwoona thanked him. It was a fantasy idea. No, it's as good an idea now as it ever was. By the way, what's the story? The story? Min asked about. Yeah, what's the play? She began hesitantly. It's about a wizard who comes to a village saying he's going to help the people, and he does. These goats come and they eat weeds, and in common you say, shit, diamonds. But soon the village has so many diamonds a group of thieves come to steal them. The wizard is working with the thieves, He's jealous that he created these goats, but never gets to appreciate the riches because the shit falls and anyone can pick it up. Ah, so it's a song play, Spliff reflected. He had traveled through an elven village once and seen this type of performance where everything in the story was very obvious, more about the singing than any other aspect. Song plays were one of the primary cultural products from elves. I did think of it as a song play, yes, Miniwuna agreed. It doesn't seem very subtle. That's good, Spliff thanked Jemima as she brought over the spiced beer and he took a large sip. Tycho was frustrated. What are we talking about? Fanur, this is all meaningless. In 3 days, Yomes are going to lose their lives. Everyone paused on this outburst. Jemima gave them a sidelong look from the bar. She'd never seen an outburst from Tycho before. Spliff wasn't sure what he was willing to risk. Didn't know what he had to risk, honestly. Could barely keep track of who he was. He was kind of stuck on the play idea, mostly because it was something he could see through with minimal risk. Miniwuna was bashful. She hung her head, and Tycho apologized to the table and her. I don't know why I feel ashamed. I thought it might work if we had more time, Min said. Let's just do it, Spliff said, the worm liquor clearly affecting him now. Let's get drunk and go up and sing it to anyone who wants to listen. They'll think us fools. I know many of those snobs. I say we go back to the pamphlets. Tell them directly, Tycho said. Go around handing them out? No, thank you. We were writing for people who wanted to know the truth. I'll scribe out a few, but I'd leave them somewhere, like the other pamphlets, the unknown gnome said. We appreciate you. That's more than plenty, Tycho said reassuringly. He didn't want to have to write out all the pamphlets himself. All right, you give me a couple and I'll take them up to Falcior's, Spliff said, enjoying his spiced beer. Is that a good idea? Min asked, still convinced the whole thing was being orchestrated. I'll say I found them in the street. At the very least, their reaction will tell me something. Tycho nodded to this notion. But what about the woman? Who do we think she is? Do we even say it's a woman? I think we treat it like a rumor everyone already knows in Iona. It's common knowledge outside. All right, but we have to make sure someone in the mountain guard sees one of the pamphlets. It's been a long time since we've had violence. They won't be expecting, Tycho said. There was agreement and then a silence. Tycho took out quills, ink, and paper from his bag. This mountain really has become a den of domesticated creatures, hasn't it? Spliff noted, in a philosophical mood, thinking about what they were trying to save. Didn't living things need to save themselves first? It's an odd type of progress. We've become like cats, independent and yet entirely beholden to our luxuries. It seems like the worst place to be is between slave and master. At least slaves know they're slaves, and masters know they're masters. We're neither. Don't know what we are. I don't think it's better to be a slave in any circumstance, Miniwuna said, without derision, sincerely. You're right. I'm sure, but still. Spliff drank his beer and looked up at the dull purple lights in the tavern. Chapter Questions of Force. She came to his room again in the dark, though this time it was near the morn, and he'd already been sleeping for many hours. She was sitting on the end of his bed as he awoke to her presence. Again she appeared unreal, almost like an apparition, but Francis was more prepared this time, not that this gave him any real protection from her charms. He followed her through the not-so-secret passage and back to her room. Again her gnome maid left soon after they'd entered, carrying 2 buckets with her. Steam lilted out of a clawfoot tub by her bookshelves. I would like for you to take a bath, Popheme said definitively. Francis walked over to the tub and ran his fingers through the water. It was pleasantly warm. He agreed. Are you leaving? He asked, pretending modesty. Why would I leave? Nothing I haven't seen before. Judging by your beard, I'm sure you will be well concealed by your naturalness. Francis smirked. Undetected behind his beard, he began to undress. So, you've found my odor offensive? I prefer distinct. Do Druids reject bathing for some spiritual reason? Popheme asked. I've bathed in more lakes than your average villager, I'd bet. He slipped into the water. It felt nice. His muscles relaxed. Would you like to read a book while you bathed? Bopheme wafted over in front of him. I know you're not familiar with my collection, but there's one in particular I think you should, peruse. She picked a modest leather-bound volume. She handed it to him after he shook his hands, banishing water droplets. She walked behind him, running her fingers through his hair as she did, the nails scratching his scalp. Francis read the title, On the History and Attempts of Apotheosis. Bopheme let him open the cover and read for a while, helping herself to a cup of tea from a pot and tinkling the cup with a tiny silver wand. She sat in a chair behind him, looking at the back of his head. She put down her cup, stood again, and walked to her table of unctures and lathered her hands. She approached him from behind. Hands in the air. Dunk your head, she commanded. Francis obliged. She rubbed the oils through his wet hair and squatted down, running the extras through his beard, tugging on his face. She finally grabbed a handful of his beard and whispered into his ear, Rinse. And he did. She pushed his head under gently and tossed his hair in the water. When he rose, she brushed wet strands from his face and pulled them behind his ears. Then she returned to her chair, picked up her cup of tea, and sipped. Francis was having trouble paying attention to the book. The last minutes had been both sensual and a little patronizing. He had a strange half-erection. It felt kind of like being aroused in his sleep. Having just woken and now the warm bath, concentration felt impossible. He asked Bopheme for a cup of tea. She obliged and brought him a cup, and he handed her back the book. Maybe you can sum it up for me. She laid the book back on the shelf and returned to her chair. Summation for such a large subject is tricky, but not impossible. Long story short, it's never been done. What hasn't? Francis asked. Apotheosis. I don't believe I'm familiar with the term, Francis said. Becoming a god, Bopheme said. Druids don't believe in gods. Oh, you must certainly have a mother, tree, or some symbol. No, not really, Francis said. I never really believed myself either, until I read that book, and interacting with a theromite. Francis drank down his tea, hoping for extra energy. I still don't understand why you've been teaching me along with Spliff. The information is useless to me. Oh no, I doubt you believe it's useless. Does it feel useless? Bopheme asked. No, I suppose not. Good. She took a sip of her tea and set the cup down with a tink on the table. 'Cause the whole thing has been for your benefit. I have no intention of helping the king. She couldn't see his face respond to this revelation, and she didn't need to. She smiled to herself. I don't understand. Francis was now a little nervous. He couldn't see her. His ears were on high alert for any sound. Even if your friend goes to the capital, he won't be able to make the machine work. The king has never received a shipment of a theromite. Francis said nothing for a moment. I still don't understand. Bopheme stood, and Francis turned his neck instinctively. He could not see the whole of her, but could tell she was lifting up and removing her nightgown. She walked up to him and asked if he would like any more tea, glowing in her nakedness. Before he could respond, she took the empty cup from his hands and set it down, and they watched each other's eyes as she got into the opposite side of the tub and slid slowly down, making sure to keep her long dark hair outside the water. Water splashed onto the floor as they adjusted their legs to accommodate one another. The ball of her foot gently nicked his genitals, and Francis grimaced and laughed. So, I'm curious, how much sex does a druid have? Do you copulate with beasts? Bopheme asked. Francis resisted the minor feeling of being insulted. No, it seems only herd animals, which happen to be the convenient height, and druids keep no creature. I imagine many women find this compelling, Bopheme said. There have been a few. Francis didn't want to give away anything. Detecting this, she revealed her short teeth, and the wrinkles by her eyes were like the flashing of eagle's feathers. Tell me about them, if you'd like. Not much to tell, Francis said. So no children? No. How would you know? Why don't you take my word for it? Francis said. She narrowed her eyes at him. Then she relaxed and lifted her chest in the water, protruding her breasts. I think it's my turn to ask some questions, Francis said, trying to get some power back. Why were the sight of her nipples so intoxicating? That was the first question in his mind. Spongy pebbles on top of a ringed hump, and yet so seemingly filled with soft possibility. Why are you teaching Spliff if you aren't going to help the king? It's helpful to talk to colleagues. Before now, I had no one else who knew the things I knew. I'm not really teaching him anything, just saving him a little time. As I said, she splashed a tinkle of water with her fingertips at him, I am teaching you. Why? Because I want you to believe me when I say it's possible. Under the water, she moved a hand lightly over his shin. He did the same in return. She had a pouty cleft in her upper lip, with her mouth pressed together. Francis couldn't read her at all. The look was both pain and pleasure. I think you will believe me, Bofim said flippantly, running her fingers to his feet where she tickled them lightly. Francis couldn't hold back a smile. I think you should tell me what I'm going to believe. Apotheosis. Or maybe that's what the ignorant would call it. Some might have accused you of trying to play gods. How so? Francis asked. By trying to transform into an animal. When did I tell you about that? The other night, when you had your head on my lap. Oh. Francis pulled his hands out of the tub, laid them on the sides. She leaned in as much as she could without getting her hair wet, and tickled his inner thigh. How about a drink, if it's not too early for you? I find that's when it works best. We are crossing over into a different dimension. Courage, even if it's liquid, is good. Francis agreed. She rose out of the tub and walked over to a rack, grabbing a thick gown which she wrapped around herself. She brought another robe over and laid it next to him. She poured 2 drinks, and he stood, putting on the robe. They sat across from each other like the first time. Francis rubbed his still damp beard with the inside of his robe. They just looked at each other for a while, and Francis drank his fruity sherry. I'm not going to trick you again, Bofim finally said. Okay. Really, Francis stood up and poured himself another small glass of sherry, interrupting her. It's okay. Maybe everything's a trick. Maybe nothing is. I don't hold it against you. Good. It'd probably be easier to trick me again rather than get me to believe. Do you believe you felt something the first time? I do. I felt it. No belief necessary. So let's forget belief. There's things beyond what we see, taste, and hear. Everything flows through time. What your friend called a theramite has access to this dimension, I think. It produces ergon by eating time. Interesting thought. Francis sat back down. Bofim spread her legs so he could see lots of thigh through the parted robe. He mimicked her posture, not really sure why. Perhaps they were bracing for something. It's very interesting. It led me to consider some of the other potentials one might have by accessing time. Your friend's first thoughts, and of course the king's and Braga, Falsior's. Instant fires, explosions, weapons. This light business was my idea, but it's a distraction. You aren't like them, and neither am I. Think what one could do if you finally understood time. She hugged the air above and around her as if pretending to capture it. It would make one a god, Francis said, matter of fact. Precisely. Bofim's swelled lips parted in a big smile. Hence the book on apotheosis. Yes, you don't need to read it. It's a history of failures. So you want to be the first god? Francis asked. Bofim waited, watching him intently. No, she finally said, and pushed her knees wide apart, the robe coming loose around her. I want to give birth to one. Francis stared directly into her sex. There was already a pearl of milky moisture poised on the base of her entrance. Oh God, Francis thought, it's inevitable. He was finding it profoundly difficult to think. Thankfully she stood, though as she stood she let the robe slip from her shoulders, and turning away from him, her backside was equally entrancing. What if a child is conceived outside of time? With time against us, life is nothing other than an inconvenience or a threat. It's dull, incredibly boring, but with this... She picked up 2 vials of liquid from her workbench, turned to face him, purely naked and already outside of time in Francis's mind. With this, our Ergon will fully become. It will permeate us, and in such a union, never before accomplished, there will be a being who has a pure relationship with time. She walked back and sat next to him on the sofa. She held out a vial for him. He took it and moved away from her, swung his feet up on top of her naked legs, and reclined against an armrest. She could see his member turgid under the robe he'd thrown over to conceal his inevitability. I have 2 questions, Francis said as he swirled the vial, reminded vividly of the toad venom he had ingested, which seemed almost a lifetime ago. The first is, why me? Why not you? This is a grand plan, a whole life's work. You don't seem the type to decide on a whim. Why me? Oh, she smiled, you give me too much credit. Every being is an opportunist, but our daughter won't be. Our daughter, Francis laughed. He could get lost on that presumption, but he tried to stay on topic. Damn this erection. It kept getting harder and it was starting to hurt. Do you not find any comfort in the past? Francis said. Popheme looked at him deeply. I'm not sure what you mean. If a being is time, where do they find their comfort? Our limited interaction with time may be boring. Granted, Francis held out the vial in a cheers gesture, but time is the golden raindrops of my life. If you took my time away, I don't know what beauty would be left. She looked at him sensually. Francis continued, If not why me, why now? Why not wait for a more suitable candidate? The cleft in the middle of Pophene's upper lip became pronounced as she squeezed her lips together. Do you believe? She asked. I don't know. Maybe. She opened her vial and drank it down, licking the rim. She threw the vial on the floor and spread his legs. She stuck her hand underneath Francis's balls and tickled them. She moved her face as close as she could get to his while still seeing each other's eyes. She dropped her head down and started sucking on Francis, and he couldn't remember what his second question was. After a moment she stopped and moved her mouth back up to him and kissed him on the lips. Drink, she said. It'll take a minute to fill you completely. Francis drank his vial. He had no choice in the matter.